priest dies in his sleep, his journey to heaven will blow your mind. NDE. The dim light of the flickering candle cast long shadows across the walls of Father Marcus' modest bedroom. The priest sat at his small wooden desk, his hands folded in prayer. The Bible lay open in front of him, its well-worn pages illuminated by the soft glow. It was late, well past midnight, but Father Marcus had always found peace in the stillness of the night. This was when he felt closest to God. He whispered his prayer aloud, his voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. Lord, guide me in your wisdom. If my work on this earth is done, grant me peace in your eternal presence. But if I am to remain, show me the way forward. The words hung in the air, the room heavy with an almost tangible silence. Father Marcus sighed and closed the Bible, his weathered hands lingering on its cover. He had been the shepherd of his parish for nearly 40 years, guiding his congregation through joy, sorrow, and doubt. Lately, though, his body had begun to fail him. The persistent ache in his chest, the dizzy spells, he had dismissed them all, trusting in faith to carry him through. As he rose to extinguish the candle, a sudden wave of fatigue washed over him, more intense than any he had felt before. He staggered, clutching the edge of the desk for support. His vision blurred, the room spinning around him. He tried to call out, but no sound escaped his lips. The world around him dissolved into darkness. Father Marcus opened his eyes to an overwhelming brightness. At first, he thought he was still dreaming, or perhaps waking into the dawn. But this light was different. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but warm and all-encompassing, like stepping into the embrace of an old friend. He stood, his body feeling strangely weightless, and looked around. The space was vast, stretching endlessly in every direction. The ground beneath his feet was not earth but a shimmering golden surface that felt solid yet intangible. The air was filled with a faint, melodic hum, as though the very fabric of the place resonated with harmony. "Where am I?" Marcus murmured, his voice echoing softly. "You have crossed the threshold," a voice replied, clear and resonant. Marcus turned, his breath catching. Before him stood a figure cloaked in radiant light. Though its features were indistinct, he felt no fear. The presence exuded a sense of peace, of authority tempered with compassion. "Am I dead?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. The figure inclined its head slightly. "Your earthly journey has ended, but your spirit has not yet reached its final destination. You stand at the crossroads of eternity." Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, curiosity, and an undercurrent of apprehension. He had spent his entire life devoted to his faith, preaching about the glory of heaven. And now he was here. But why the hesitation? Why this in-between place? "What happens now?" he asked, his voice steadier. "That depends on you," the figure replied. "There is much to understand before you may proceed. Follow me." The figure began to move, and Marcus hesitated for only a moment before following. With each step, the golden ground beneath his feet seemed to ripple, the light around them shifting subtly. As they walked, Marcus noticed shapes forming in the distance, vague, shadowy outlines that grew clearer as they approached. When they stopped, Marcus realized he was standing in what appeared to be a grand hall. The walls shimmered like polished gold, and the air carried a faint scent of something sweet and unplaceable. But it was the massive doors at the far end of the hall that drew his attention. They were enormous, carved with intricate designs that seemed to shift and move as though alive. "You stand before the gates of judgment," the figure said. "But before they open, you must face the truth of your journey." Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing. "What truth?" "I have lived a life of devotion. I have served the Lord to the best of my ability." "Indeed," the figure said, "but devotion alone does not grant passage. There are lessons still to be learned even here." The words sent a chill through Marcus, though the air around him remained warm. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the ground beneath them shifted. The golden hall faded, replaced by a scene from his past. Marcus recognized the place immediately. It was his childhood home, a modest house in a quiet countryside village. He stood in the living room, watching as a younger version of himself knelt beside his mother's chair. She was frail, her once vibrant face pale and etched with lines of pain. "You must promise me, Marcus," she said, her voice weak but firm. "Promise me you will serve others. That you will dedicate your life to something greater than yourself." The younger Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I promise, Mama. I'll make you proud." The scene shifted again, fast-forwarding through time. Marcus saw himself as a young seminarian, fervently studying scripture, his heart set on fulfilling his promise. He saw the day he was ordained, the joy in his mother's eyes as she watched him take his vows. He saw years of sermons, baptisms, and confessions, moments of joy and sorrow that defined his ministry. But then the scenes darkened. He saw himself older, standing in the pulpit, his voice booming with authority. The congregation listened intently, but Marcus noticed something he hadn't seen before. A man in the back row sat slumped, his face drawn with despair. Marcus remembered the sermon. It had been about the dangers of straying from faith, but he hadn't noticed the man's silent cry for help. The scene shifted again. Marcus was in his office, an older parishioner sitting across from him. She was speaking, her voice shaking with emotion, but Marcus was distracted, his eyes flicking to the clock on the wall. He had been preoccupied with planning the upcoming festival, and though he nodded along, he hadn't truly heard her. The images continued, each one revealing moments he had overlooked, people he had failed to truly see. By the time the visions stopped, Marcus felt a heaviness in his chest, different from the physical pain he had experienced in life. It was the weight of realization, of regret. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his voice cracking. "To understand the truth of your journey," the figure said. "You have served with faith, but not always with presence. Devotion is not measured by rituals alone, but by the love and attention you give to those around you." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was fulfilling my promise." "And you were," the figure said gently. "But there is more to learn even now. The path forward requires you to see, to understand, and to grow." The golden light around them began to shift again, the grand hall reappearing. Marcus turned to face the gates of judgment, their intricate carvings more vibrant than before. He took a deep breath, the weight of his realizations settling over him. "I'm ready to learn," he said softly. The figure nodded, its light glowing brighter. "Then let us continue." The gates of judgment loomed in the distance as the golden light around Father Marcus pulsed softly, like the heartbeat of this otherworldly realm. He walked beside the radiant figure, his steps slow and deliberate. The weight of what he had just seen, those moments of missed connection, of opportunities lost, pressed on him like an invisible burden. "Why show me this now?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What can I do about it? My time on earth is over." The figure didn't respond immediately, its glowing form radiating a steady calm. Finally, it said, "Your time on earth may be over, but your journey is not. There is still much you can learn, and much that can be redeemed." Marcus frowned. "Redeemed? How do you mean?" "You will see," the figure said simply, gesturing ahead. The golden floor beneath them shimmered, the light bending and twisting as the world around them shifted again. Marcus felt the strange sensation of movement without walking, as though he was being gently carried forward through time and space. When the motion stopped, he found himself standing in the middle of a small chapel. He recognized it instantly. It was his first assignment as a newly ordained priest. The room was simple but filled with warmth. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the wooden pews. At the far end of the room, a younger Marcus stood at the altar, delivering his first sermon. His face was alive with passion and hope, his voice filled with conviction. "This was my beginning," Marcus said softly, watching the scene unfold. "I remember the nerves, the excitement. I thought I could change the world. And yet," the figure said, "even in this moment, there were lessons left unlearned." Marcus turned to the pews, where a young couple sat in the back row. The woman held a baby, her eyes downcast, while the man sat rigidly, his jaw clenched. They looked nervous, as though they didn't belong. Marcus squinted, trying to recall the memory. He couldn't place their faces, but something about them felt familiar. The younger Marcus finished his sermon, stepping down from the pulpit to greet the congregation. People approached him one by one, offering congratulations and words of encouragement. The young couple lingered at the back, hesitant. When the younger Marcus finally approached them, the man spoke first. "Thank you for your words, Father," he said, his voice stiff. They were inspiring. The younger Marcus smiled warmly. "I'm glad you found them meaningful. Please, feel free to join us anytime." The man nodded, but the woman's eyes remained fixed on the floor. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the younger Marcus, already distracted by another parishioner approaching, gave a polite nod and moved on. The scene froze, and Marcus felt his chest tighten. "I didn't notice," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't see how much they were struggling. They came seeking guidance," the figure said, its voice steady. "But they did not find it. Their burdens remained unshared, their voices unheard." Marcus turned to the figure, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I was young, inexperienced. I didn't know how to see those things back then." "True," the figure said. "But even as you grew older, as your experience deepened, there were still moments like this. You became so focused on the rituals, the duties of your position, that you often overlooked the people who needed you most." The golden light around them shifted again, and Marcus found himself in a different place. It was a hospital room, sterile and cold. A middle-aged man lay in the bed, his face pale and gaunt. Marcus immediately recognized the man. His name was Peter, a longtime member of his parish who had passed away years earlier. Marcus watched as his younger self entered the room, his expression kind but hurried. He offered Peter a prayer, spoke briefly about God's grace, and then left. The entire visit lasted less than 10 minutes. "I thought I was providing comfort," Marcus said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Wasn't that enough?" "Comfort comes not only from words but from presence," the figure replied. Peter did not need a sermon in that moment. He needed a friend. Someone to sit with him, to hold his hand, to simply be there. Marcus lowered his head, the weight of the truth settling over him. He had always believed his words were enough, that his sermons, his prayers, and his guidance were what mattered most. But now, he was beginning to see the gaps he had left behind. The scene shifted once more, and Marcus found himself back in his own church, standing behind the pulpit. The room was empty, the pews bathed in the soft light of the afternoon sun. It was a familiar sight, a place where he had spent countless hours preaching, praying, and guiding his flock. "This was my life," Marcus said quietly. "This was where I thought I was doing God's work." "And you were," the figure said. "But there is always more to learn, always more to see." Marcus turned to face the figure, his expression filled with desperation. "If I failed to see these things in life, how can I fix them now? I can't go back. I can't change what's already done." "No," the figure agreed. "But understanding is the first step. Growth does not end with death, Marcus. It is eternal." The golden light around them began to dim, the familiar shimmer of the in-between place returning. Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions, regret for the moments he had missed, but also a glimmer of hope. If his journey wasn't over, then perhaps he still had a chance to make things right. "Am I to be judged for my failures?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. "You are not judged for your failures," the figure said. "You are judged for what you learn from them, and for how you choose to grow." The words struck something deep within Marcus, a truth he had always preached but perhaps never fully understood. The light around him pulsed gently, and the figure extended a hand. "Come," it said. "There is more to see." Marcus hesitated for only a moment before taking the figure's hand. As the light enveloped him once more, he felt a sense of purpose begin to stir within him. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but he was ready to face whatever came next. As the golden light enveloped him once again, Father Marcus felt a subtle shift in the air. The radiant figure walked ahead of him, its glowing form steady and unwavering. Marcus followed in silence, his thoughts heavy with the revelations he had already encountered. Every step felt like a journey deeper into his own soul, peeling back layers he had never dared to examine. The shimmering surroundings began to change, the golden glow dimming to reveal a simple, familiar scene. Marcus found himself standing in the church rectory, the scent of old wood and candle wax filling the air. The room was small and unassuming, the kind of place where countless meetings and quiet moments of reflection had taken place. But this wasn't just any day in the rectory, it was a memory. Marcus saw himself seated at the desk, his younger face tense as he spoke to a man sitting across from him. The man was in his late 30s, his clothes rumpled and his hands clenched tightly together. His eyes were red, and his voice wavered as he spoke. "Father, I don't know what to do," the man said. "My marriage is falling apart. I've tried everything, but it feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough." Marcus remembered this conversation vividly. The man's name was Andrew, a devoted parishioner who had sought his counsel many times. At the time, Marcus had thought his advice had been adequate. A scripture about patience, a prayer for clarity, and a reminder that God's plan always prevailed. The younger Marcus in the memory leaned forward, his expression kind but detached. "Sometimes, Andrew, the trials we face are meant to test our faith. Have you prayed on this?" Andrew nodded quickly. "I pray every day, Father. But it doesn't seem to help. I feel like I'm losing everything." The younger Marcus offered a reassuring smile. "Continue to pray and trust in God's will. Remember, He works in ways we cannot always see." The scene froze, and Marcus felt a pang of regret. He turned to the radiant figure, his voice trembling. "I thought I was helping him. I thought I was giving him the guidance he needed." "You gave him words," the figure said, its voice calm but firm. "But words alone do not heal a broken heart. Andrew did not come to you for answers. He came to you for understanding. For someone to see his pain." Marcus closed his eyes, guilt washing over him. He remembered what had happened to Andrew afterward. His marriage had ended in divorce, and he had eventually drifted away from the church. Marcus had always told himself that Andrew's struggles were beyond his control, that he had done his best. But now, standing in this moment, he wasn't so sure. "What could I have done differently?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You could have listened," the figure replied. "Truly listened. Sometimes, the greatest act of faith is not in speaking, but in being present. In bearing witness to another's pain." The words struck deep, and Marcus felt the weight of them settle over him. He had always believed his role as a priest was to guide, to offer wisdom and solutions. But now he saw the moments where his need to provide answers had blinded him to the deeper needs of those he served. The scene shifted again, the rectory fading into a new memory. This time, Marcus found himself in a crowded parish hall. It was a lively scene, children running around, tables laden with food, and the sound of laughter filling the air. It was one of the annual community dinners, an event Marcus had always looked forward to. He watched as his younger self moved through the crowd, greeting parishioners with warm smiles and hearty handshakes. But as he observed more closely, Marcus noticed something he hadn't seen before. In the corner of the room, a young woman sat alone, her plate untouched. She looked out of place, her posture stiff and her eyes darting nervously. Marcus recognized her now. Her name was Clara, a newcomer to the parish at the time. The younger Marcus glanced in her direction but didn't approach. He was pulled into a conversation with another parishioner, laughing at a light-hearted joke and then moving on to the next group. Clara remained in the corner, her isolation unnoticed. The scene froze, and Marcus turned to the figure, his chest tight. "Why are you showing me this? I didn't know she was struggling." "She was," the figure said, its voice gentle. "And she left that night feeling unseen, unwelcome. She never returned to the parish." Marcus felt a deep ache in his heart. "I didn't mean to ignore her. I was trying to make everyone feel welcome." And yet, the figure said, one soul was left behind. The impact of our actions, or inactions, is not always visible, but it is always present. The golden light around them pulsed softly, and Marcus lowered his head. He had always taken pride in his ability to bring people together, to create a sense of community within the parish. But now he saw the cracks, the places where his focus had faltered. The memory faded, and Marcus found himself once again standing in the endless golden expanse. The radiant figure stood beside him, its light steady and unwavering. These moments, Marcus said quietly, they feel so small, so insignificant. But now, seeing them like this, they're not, are they? Every moment carries weight, the figure replied. Every interaction, every choice, ripples outward. A kind word, a listening ear, a gesture of understanding, these are the acts that build bridges, that mend broken hearts. Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing with the implications. But what can I do now? If I can't go back, if I can't change these moments? Understanding is the beginning, the figure said. But there is more to your journey. You have seen the past, now you must see the present. The golden light around them began to shift again, brighter this time, as though heralding something profound. Marcus felt a surge of anticipation mixed with trepidation. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew it would demand even more of him. As the light enveloped him, the figure's voice echoed one last time, "You are not finished, Marcus." "Not yet?" As the golden light rippled and shifted, Father Marcus felt a subtle change in the air around him. The radiant figure moved ahead with a deliberate pace, its presence unwavering. Marcus followed closely, a growing tension in his chest. He had faced moments from his past, reliving the times he had overlooked the quiet cries for help. Now, the figure had promised something new, the present. "What does it mean to see the present?" Marcus asked, his voice hesitant. "You will understand soon," the figure replied. "The present is not only what unfolds before you. It is the state of the heart, the moment of connection." The golden shimmer around them faded, revealing a vibrant scene. Marcus stood in the center of his church, but it was not a memory. The pews were filled with familiar faces, parishioners he had served for years. The room buzzed with life, yet Marcus felt like an outsider, as though he were a ghost watching from the edge of reality. The radiant figure gestured toward the congregation. "These are the people of your present, the ones you shepherded, guided, and loved. But look closely, Marcus. What do you see?" Marcus turned his gaze to the crowd. At first, everything seemed normal, smiling faces, whispered conversations, the gentle hum of a community gathered in faith. But as he looked closer, subtle cracks began to appear. The expressions of some parishioners faltered, their smiles strained. Others sat stiffly, their eyes downcast, as though weighed down by unseen burdens. His attention was drawn to a man sitting near the back, his face pale and his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Marcus recognized him instantly, Paul, a longtime parishioner who had recently lost his job. Marcus had spoken to him only briefly after Mass the previous week, offering a prayer and a few words of encouragement. But now, watching Paul's trembling hands and hollow eyes, Marcus realized just how much he had missed. "Paul," Marcus said softly, his heart aching. "He's struggling." "Yes," the figure said. "And he is not alone." Marcus turned to another corner of the room, where a young woman sat with her 2 children. Her face was weary, her shoulders slumped as though she carried the weight of the world. Marcus recognized her too, Maria, a single mother who had often asked for prayers for strength. He had always admired her resilience but had never paused to ask what she truly needed. The whispers of conversations filled the air, fragments of voices overlapping. Marcus strained to listen, catching snippets of words. "I don't know how I'll make it through the week. I've prayed, but I feel so alone. Does anyone even see me?" The voices grew louder, their pain and doubt cutting through Marcus like a blade. He turned to the figure, his chest tight with guilt. "I've tried to help them," he said. "I've prayed for them, guided them. Isn't that enough?" "You gave them what you thought they needed," the figure replied, its tone calm but firm. "But did you ever truly ask what they sought? Did you meet them where they were, or did you remain at a distance, offering what felt safe and sufficient?" Marcus lowered his head, the weight of the question pressing on him. He had always believed he was doing his best, but now he saw the gaps in his efforts, the times he had offered words instead of presence, solutions instead of empathy. The scene shifted again. Marcus found himself standing in his office, the desk cluttered with papers and books. It was a memory, but one that still felt immediate and raw. The door opened, and a teenager walked in, his expression nervous. Marcus recognized him immediately, Jacob, a troubled young man who had come to him for guidance. In the memory, Marcus barely looked up from his desk. "Come in, Jacob," he said, his tone distracted. "What's on your mind?" Jacob hesitated, his hands fidgeting. "I just wanted to talk," he said quietly. "I've been feeling really lost lately." The younger Marcus nodded, still focused on the papers in front of him. "Have you been praying about it?" he asked. "Sometimes, when we feel lost, prayer can help us find our way." Jacob nodded quickly. "Yeah, I've been praying. But it's not helping. I feel like no one's listening. Not even God." The younger Marcus finally looked up, his expression kind but rushed. "That's normal, Jacob. Faith isn't always about feeling heard. Sometimes it's about trusting, even in silence." The memory froze, and Marcus felt his heart sink. He turned to the figure, his voice trembling. "I didn't listen. He came to me for help, and I didn't listen." "You heard his words," the figure said, "but you didn't hear his heart." Marcus clenched his fists, guilt clawing at him. He remembered what had happened to Jacob. A few months after that conversation, the boy had left the church, distancing himself from the community entirely. Marcus had told himself it was just a phase, that Jacob would find his way back in time. But now he wondered if he could have done more. The memory dissolved, replaced once again by the golden expanse. The figure stood silently beside Marcus, its light steady and unwavering. Marcus felt the weight of the revelations pressing down on him, but amidst the guilt, a spark of determination began to grow. "What can I do now?" he asked. "If I can't go back and change these moments, how do I make things right?" "By understanding," the figure replied. "By seeing what you could not see before. Every choice, every action, ripples outward. You cannot undo the past, but you can carry its lessons forward." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had spent his life trying to serve his parish, to be a source of strength and guidance. But now he saw the cracks in his efforts, the places where he had fallen short. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he couldn't remain the same. "What happens next?" he asked, his voice steady. "There is still more to see," the figure said. "You have faced your past and glimpsed your present. But the journey is not yet complete." The light around them began to shift again, brighter and more focused. Marcus felt a sense of anticipation building within him, a feeling that something profound was about to unfold. He didn't know what awaited him, but he was ready to face it. The light around Marcus intensified, its golden glow shifting to something more dynamic, more alive. It wasn't static anymore. Colors swirled and pulsed, hues of deep blue and white intertwining in mesmerizing patterns. Marcus felt the weight of expectation in the air, a sense that the choices ahead would matter more than anything he had faced thus far. "Where are we now?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but tinged with apprehension. The radiant figure moved beside him, its form blending seamlessly with the swirling light. "You stand at the crossroads," it said. "This is where the eternal and the finite converge. A place where truth cannot be hidden." Ahead, Marcus saw what appeared to be two paths. One was bright and inviting, its golden surface smooth and gleaming. The other was darker, rough and uneven, the stones jagged and sharp. Both seemed endless, stretching beyond his vision. "This is your choice," the figure continued. "But it is not as simple as a path taken. You must first see what lies within." Marcus frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "What do you mean? I've already seen my past and my present. What more is there?" The figure gestured, and the air shimmered, revealing a scene that made Marcus' heart clench. He stood in the middle of a familiar hospital room. A young boy lay in the bed, his small frame dwarfed by the machines surrounding him. Marcus recognized the boy instantly, Liam, a child from his parish who had battled cancer for years. Marcus remembered this day vividly. He had come to pray with Liam, offering comfort to the boy and his grieving parents. But as he watched the memory unfold, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The younger Marcus stood by the bed, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder as he spoke a quiet prayer. Liam's parents stood nearby, their eyes red and swollen, but their expressions carried a faint glimmer of hope. It wasn't the prayer that struck Marcus now, it was Liam's face. The boy's eyes, wide and solemn, were locked onto the younger Marcus as if searching for something more. A flicker of hesitation passed over Liam's face, but he said nothing. "Do you see it?" the figure asked, its voice gentle but firm. Marcus nodded slowly. "He was looking for more than words," he said. "He wanted something deeper." "And what did you give him?" the figure asked. Marcus swallowed hard, guilt rising in his chest. "A prayer," he admitted, "but not my full presence. I didn't stay long. I had other visits to make." The memory shifted abruptly. Marcus found himself outside the hospital room, watching as Liam turned to his parents after Marcus had left. The boy's voice was soft but clear. "Do you think Father Marcus believes God hears his prayers?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had spent years preaching about faith and the power of prayer, but now he saw the subtle cracks in his own approach. He had spoken the words, but had he truly embodied the belief behind them? Had he shown Liam and his family that he believed in the power of God's love as deeply as he preached it? "Faith is not only spoken," the figure said. "It is lived. It is felt. It is seen in the smallest gestures." Marcus turned to the figure, his chest tight. "I thought I was doing what I could. I thought I was helping." "And you were," the figure said. "But helping is not the same as being. Sometimes, the greatest act of faith is to simply remain present in another's pain." The scene faded, and Marcus was back at the crossroads. The two paths still stretched before him, their significance growing heavier in his mind. He turned to the figure, his voice trembling. "What happens if I choose wrong?" he asked. "There is no wrong choice," the figure replied. "There is only truth and growth. But the path you choose will shape your eternity." Marcus's mind raced. He thought about the moments he had seen, the missed connections, the opportunities to be present that he had overlooked. He thought about Liam, about Andrew, about Maria and Paul. Each had come to him seeking something beyond words, beyond answers. And while he had given them guidance, he now saw how much more he could have offered. The air shimmered again, and Marcus saw another memory unfold. This time, it was from his seminary days. He was young and eager, sitting in a classroom filled with other students. The professor, an older priest with a commanding presence, stood at the front of the room. "Remember this," the professor said, his voice firm. "A shepherd does not lead his flock with sermons alone. He walks among them, listens to their fears, and shares in their burdens. To serve God is to serve his people, not with pride, but with humility." The younger Marcus had nodded earnestly, scribbling notes in the margins of his notebook. But now, as he watched the scene, he realized how often he had failed to live up to those words. He had led his parish with conviction, but had he walked among them? Had he truly listened to their fears and shared in their burdens? The memory faded, and Marcus stood silently at the crossroads. He turned to the radiant figure, his voice steadier now. "If I walk this darker path, what will I find?" "You will find the fullness of your journey," the figure said. "The path is not easy, but it will lead you to understanding and to grace." Marcus took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He had spent his life trying to serve God, trying to be a light for his parish. But now he saw that service was not about perfection, it was about presence. It was about being with people in their darkest moments, not just offering them words but truly seeing them, truly knowing them. He stepped toward the darker path, his heart pounding. The stones beneath his feet were rough and uneven, but he didn't falter. The radiant figure walked beside him, its light steady. "Your journey is not over, Marcus," the figure said. "There is more to learn, more to see, and more to give." As Marcus walked forward, the swirling light around him began to change again, growing brighter and more focused. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he felt ready to face it. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to serve, not as a leader, but as a companion on the journey of faith. As Marcus walked the darker path, the air around him shifted, growing heavier but not oppressive. It was the weight of something ancient, something meaningful. The radiant figure moved beside him, its light steady but subdued, as if to let the surroundings take center stage. The path wound through a landscape that seemed both infinite and intimate, a place that existed outside of time, yet felt deeply personal. Marcus glanced at the jagged stones beneath his feet. Each step required focus and effort, the uneven ground forcing him to remain present. The golden glow that had accompanied his journey thus far was dimmer here, replaced by a subdued luminescence that highlighted the imperfections around him. "What lies ahead?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but curious. "What lies within?" the figure replied. "The truth of your heart, the choices you made, and the meaning behind them." The path opened into a clearing, and Marcus stopped in his tracks. Before him was an intricate mosaic, sprawling across the ground like a tapestry of stone and light. Each piece of the mosaic seemed alive, shifting subtly as though telling a story. Marcus stepped closer, his breath catching as he recognized scenes from his own life depicted in the mosaic. There was the image of his ordination, the moment he had dedicated his life to serving God. Beside it, smaller fragments depicted moments of triumph and connection, baptisms, marriages, and sermons that had brought comfort and joy to his parishioners. But as Marcus moved along the mosaic, he saw darker pieces interwoven with the bright ones. Missed opportunities, people he had overlooked, moments of doubt and pride. "This is my life," Marcus said softly, his voice trembling. "Every piece of it, every choice," the figure said. "Every thought, every action. It is all here, woven together to form the tapestry of your journey." Marcus knelt, his fingers brushing against one of the darker pieces. It was cold to the touch, its surface rough compared to the smoothness of the brighter fragments. He recognized the moment immediately. It was the day he had argued with a young man from his parish, dismissing his doubts about faith with a sharp rebuke. Marcus had always regretted his tone that day, but seeing it here, immortalized in the mosaic, made the regret cut deeper. "I didn't mean to push him away," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting the church, protecting the truth. But I see now. I was protecting my pride." The figure stood silently, its presence a steady reassurance. Marcus moved to another section of the mosaic, drawn to a fragment that glowed faintly. It depicted a woman lighting a candle at the altar, her face filled with quiet determination. Marcus remembered her, Elaine, a widow who had struggled with grief for years. She had come to him many times for guidance, and though he had offered her prayers and scripture, he had never truly sat with her pain. "She found comfort despite me, not because of me," Marcus murmured. "I gave her words when she needed understanding." "And yet," the figure said, "her journey continued. The light she found was not diminished by your shortcomings." Marcus looked up, his heart heavy but hopeful. "Is that the lesson? That even when I failed, God's grace continued to work through others?" "Yes," the figure replied. "But it is also a reminder that your presence mattered. Every act of love, every moment of listening, contributed to that light." Marcus rose to his feet, his gaze sweeping across the mosaic. He saw countless lives intertwined with his own, each fragment telling a story of connection, struggle, and growth. For every moment of regret, there was a moment of grace, a baptism, a prayer shared in earnest, a hand held in silence. The mosaic began to shimmer, its light growing brighter as it shifted once again. Marcus stepped back, shielding his eyes as the images dissolved into a single, radiant figure. This figure was different from the one that had guided him. It was larger, its light encompassing the entire clearing. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with awe. "I am the reflection of all you have been," the figure said. Its voice was soft but powerful, resonating in a way that made the air itself hum. "The culmination of your choices, your faith, and your doubts. You have walked this path to see not only what you were, but what you can become." Marcus felt his chest tighten, a mix of fear and hope rising within him. "Have I been enough?" he asked. "Did I serve well?" The radiant figure paused, its light pulsing gently. "You have served," it said, "and in your service, you have grown. But the question is not whether you were enough, it is whether you are ready to continue." Marcus's heart pounded. "Continue? How?" The figure extended a hand, and the air around them shimmered. Marcus saw a vision of the world below. His parish, his people, the lives he had touched and the lives he had yet to reach. It wasn't a memory, nor was it a dream. It was the present, unfolding before him with all its complexity and beauty. "There is still work to be done," the figure said. "Your journey does not end here, Marcus. You have been given the gift of understanding. Now, you must decide how to use it." Marcus stared at the vision, his mind racing. He saw Paul, sitting alone in the back pew, his hands trembling with uncertainty. He saw Maria, lighting a candle for strength as her children played nearby. He saw Jacob, older now, walking past the church with a look of hesitation. "I want to help them," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I want to be the presence they need." The figure's light grew brighter, enveloping the clearing in a golden glow. "Then step forward, Marcus. The path will not be easy, but it will be true." Marcus took a deep breath, the weight of his choices falling away as a new sense of purpose filled him. He stepped forward, the jagged stones beneath his feet giving way to light. The radiant figure's voice echoed one final time. "Remember, Marcus, faith is not a destination. It is a journey. Walk it with love." The world around him dissolved into brilliance, and Marcus felt himself moving forward, his heart ready for whatever lay ahead. The golden light around Marcus pulsed, vibrant and alive, as the radiant figure guided him forward. The jagged stones beneath his feet softened, their edges smoothing into a gentle path that stretched into the infinite horizon. The tension in Marcus's chest eased, replaced by a profound calm. He felt lighter, as though the burdens of his life, the regrets, the missed opportunities, the doubts, were dissolving into the air around him. The figure stopped and turned to face him. Its form was brighter now, its presence commanding yet kind. "You have seen the truth of your journey, Marcus," it said. "Now, the choice is yours." Marcus nodded, his voice steady but filled with reverence. "I want to continue. I want to walk this path, not just for myself, but for those I've served and those I've yet to reach." The figure extended its hand, and the air shimmered once again. This time, Marcus was surrounded by visions of his parish. He saw familiar faces, Paul, Maria, Jacob, Elaine, and so many others. But these weren't memories, they were moments unfolding in real time. He saw Paul kneeling in prayer, his shoulders shaking as tears fell silently. He saw Maria lighting a candle while her children whispered to each other in the pew. He saw Jacob hesitating at the church doors, his hand hovering over the handle as though deciding whether to enter. "These are your people," the figure said. "Their journeys continue, just as yours does. But their paths are not separate from yours. They are intertwined as all lives are." Marcus felt a swell of emotion as he watched the scenes unfold. He wanted to reach out, to tell each of them that they were not alone, that their struggles and doubts were seen and understood. He turned to the figure, his voice trembling. "What can I do for them? How can I help them now?" The figure's light pulsed gently, as if in acknowledgement of his question. "By being present," it said. "By listening. By walking alongside them in their struggles, their doubts, and their joys. You have always served, Marcus, but now you understand the deeper meaning of service." The air shimmered again, and the visions dissolved. Marcus was left standing before a massive gate, brighter and more intricate than anything he had seen before. It radiated warmth and light, its carvings alive with movement, depicting scenes of love, compassion, and grace. Marcus knew instinctively what it was: the entrance to heaven. He felt a lump rise in his throat. This was the moment he had spent his life preparing for, the culmination of his faith and devotion. Yet, as he looked at the gate, he felt no urge to move toward it. Instead, his mind was filled with thoughts of his parish, his people, and the work he had left unfinished. The radiant figure seemed to sense his hesitation. "Your path does not end here, Marcus," it said. "The gate is open to you, but so is the path back." "Back?" Marcus asked, his heart racing. "You mean, I can return?" The figure nodded. "You have been given the gift of understanding. If you choose to return, you will carry that gift with you, to serve with greater purpose. The choice is yours." Marcus hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on him. Heaven beckoned, its light promising eternal peace. But the faces of his parishioners lingered in his mind, their voices calling out to him. He thought of Paul, of Maria, of Jacob and Elaine. He thought of the lives he had touched and the ones he had yet to reach. "I choose to go back," Marcus said firmly, his voice steady. "There is still work to be done. I want to serve them, to walk with them in their struggles." The figure's light grew brighter, enveloping Marcus in warmth. "Your choice is made," it said. "Go with love, and remember, the journey is not yours alone. Walk it with those you serve." Marcus opened his eyes to the faint hum of machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic. He was lying in a hospital bed, the soft glow of morning light filtering through the window. His chest ached, but his mind was clear, his heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. A nurse entered the room, her face lighting up when she saw him awake. "Father Marcus, you gave us quite a scare," she said, her voice filled with relief. "You've been unconscious for nearly 2 days." Marcus tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The nurse handed him a glass of water, and he sipped it gratefully before finding his voice. "What happened?" he asked. "You had a heart attack," the nurse explained. "They brought you in just in time. The doctor said it was touch and go for a while, but you're going to be okay." Marcus nodded, the weight of his experience settling over him. He had been at the edge of eternity, given the choice to stay or return. And he had chosen to come back, not for himself, but for his parish, for the people who needed him. Over the next few weeks, Marcus recovered slowly, his strength returning with each passing day. But he was not the same man who had collapsed in his room that night. The experience had changed him, reshaped his understanding of faith and service. He began to spend more time with his parishioners, not just as their priest but as their companion. He listened to their stories, their doubts, and their fears, offering not just words but his presence. He visited Paul regularly, sitting with him in quiet prayer. He joined Maria and her children for Sunday meals, sharing in their laughter and struggles. He reached out to Jacob, inviting him back to the church with an open heart and an open mind. Marcus saw the changes in himself and in his parish. The connections grew deeper, the bonds stronger. And though the work was not always easy, it was fulfilling in a way he had never imagined. Late one evening, as he sat in the quiet of the church, Marcus whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for the gift of this second chance. May I walk this path with love, with humility, and with grace." The golden light that had guided him on his journey seemed to flicker faintly in the corner of his vision, a gentle reminder that he was never truly alone. And with that, Father Marcus rose, ready to continue his journey, not as a perfect man, but as one who was present, willing, and open to the lives he was called to serve. Years passed, and Father Marcus became a cornerstone of his parish in ways he had never imagined. His renewed sense of purpose brought a profound change to the community. The church, once a place of routine gatherings, transformed into a sanctuary of connection and healing. Parishioners who had felt invisible now found themselves seen and valued, their struggles met with compassion and understanding. Paul, once weighed down by despair, became an active member of the church's outreach program, helping others navigate their own hardships. Maria's children grew up with the support of a community that embraced them as family. Jacob, after many hesitant visits, returned to the church, finding not only acceptance but a mentor in Marcus. Father Marcus himself walked this path with humility, his days filled with quiet moments of grace. He spent evenings visiting homes, sitting with the sick, and sharing in both the sorrows and joys of his parishioners' lives. His sermons became less about grand declarations and more about the beauty of small, meaningful acts. On the day Marcus passed away, surrounded by the people he had loved and served, the church bells rang out in mourning and celebration. His legacy was not in the sermons he preached, but in the lives he touched. The mosaic of his journey was not perfect, but it was full, vibrant with the light of love and presence. As his spirit crossed into eternity once more, Marcus knew he had walked his path faithfully. The golden light welcomed him, not as an end, but as the beginning of something far greater than he could have ever imagined. And the people he left behind carried his lessons forward, ensuring that the echoes of his love would ripple through generations to come.